Welcome to Construction Genius. My guest today is Jonathan Orpin. He's a lifelong entrepreneur and sustainability advocate who founded two companies in the design build space, New Energy Works and Pioneer Millworks. He has over 30 years experience operating on the triple bottom line of a belief that people, planet, and profit work together to ensure a better future. And not only that, but in 2022, his company became a 100% ESOP. And so we dive into those two things, people, planet, and profit. And we also talk about how to structure an ESOP for the benefit of yourself and your employees. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Jonathan. He has some very clear views about how to run a business and how a construction company can have an impact upon the world. So feel free to share this information with anyone that you think would benefit from listening to it. And also, he does give a recommendation for a killer restaurant in Portland called Andina. And there is a link in the show notes to that. So make sure you check it out. Enjoy my conversation today here with Jonathan. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Jonathan, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks, Eric. Really glad to be here.
You have a philosophy that drives your business, and you call it the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. Introduce our audience here to what you mean by those things.
Sure. We started in the early 80s. Seems so long ago, but we started in the early 80s thinking that business would be an opportunity to help bring change. At that time, the big issue was people were becoming super aware of the planetary issues, and OPEC, had created its oil embargo, and everybody was very sensitive to that sort of stuff. So even back then, we really realized that it was more than just about profit, although profit was important. It had to do with the planet as well. Eventually, we also realized that people make it all up. And when I talk about people, I talk about our own people within the our organization, talk about our clients, of course, our suppliers, the bankers, but also our community, whatever you want to determine your community to be. Maybe it's your church, maybe it's your neighborhood, maybe it's your town. I think it's all of those things. And I also think it's the people on the planet. So which brings us to the planet itself, which is without that planet, this planet, we're kind of up shit's creek, to use a technical term. And so for us, business became early on this three-dimensional support or stool, or maybe filters, you could say, where the decisions we made had to do with people, planet, and profit, because it's pretty clear that without profit, you're not in business very long, or you're not able to attract the right people, or you're not able to create capital investment, which any business needs, or you're not able to give back to the community in the way of charitable good. And certainly you can't pay your taxes, and taxes are critical to keep the roads going and the schools open. So all those things for us created this vision of what business should be. And we really held to it for all of this time. Sadly, we haven't saved the planet and the world yet, but we're aiming for it, and I think companies like ours have that opportunity to make a difference. If everyone thought of their business in the triple bottom line, we would be a better world.
Tell me about this, your journey in terms of the green building movement and how you've seen that develop over the past 30, 40 years.
Yeah. Ups and downs, honestly, Eric. I go back a ways. I'm older, and I remember Jimmy Carter's work with the solar industry, for instance, and the solar credits back in the late 70s, early 80s. And, that created an industry, and that created a set of thoughts that Some people think that if they had just continued in that trajectory, we would not have the planetary warming and the issues that we have right now. Some people think that. And then, come mid 80s, the solar panels were taken off the White House. People no longer cared. All of the support for the industry, the solar industry, as one example, that, that we're making it a more even playing field with oil, we're all taken away. So it went down really far. And then back in the last, I'd say 8 to 10 years, it has really come back into people's mind as it's pretty clear that, in fact, there is global warming. It is a real thing. It's not a China hoax or whatever anybody in politics wants to call it. So we're getting so many more people now who are so much more interested. And young builders and young people are saying, wow, what can we do? What can we do better than our parents or their parents?
So I'm glad you brought up China, because one of the pushbacks that you get when you start talking about things like, saving the planet, is you get a shrug of the shoulders, right? And the pushback is, number one, my company and my efforts have a minuscule impact, and even if they did have an impact, then you have countries all over the world which have no real push in terms of the Western zeal for green building and stuff like that. Other parts of the world, they're just not into that, and they're just going to go doing what they want to do anyway. So what's the point?
Yeah, what is the point, really, Eric? If you can't just do what we can do, then what is the point? What's it all about? So, but I do have some pushback on your pushback, which is, I just came from Namibia, for instance, and I can tell you that they don't know what sustainable building, green building is. They just live it.
Yeah.
They're, each of those Namibians' footprint on this earth is like 1/100th of mine, and probably at least 1/50th or 1/20th of any Chinese person. So for much of the third world, it's not an issue because there's just no option for it. Their carbon footprint in this planet is small. China's a good example, though, and a good example of what isn't right. I mean, they're just pushing really hard on the wrong industries, coal as an example, or building with low-grade concrete as an example. It is true that we can't solve everybody's problem. It is also true that nobody has a bigger footprint than Americans. We really have a big environmental footprint. So we have to lead the way. And honestly, in all areas, whether it's democracy or finance or good commerce, we lead the way in the world anyway. We are the world leaders in so many ways, and people will look up to us if we do the right thing.
That's interesting, because it seems like, I mean, I get your logic that people will look up to us, but it seems like not everyone does look up to us. There's
right now.
There's plenty of people in the world that they would. It's funny because I was chatting with my kids last night, and I was talking about how let's say in the 90s and I'd say probably the 90s, America was the sole superpower in the world right after the demise of the Soviet Union, and then there came a sort of an instability, in the first part of the 2000s with the 9/11 and everything that followed that. And with the rise of China, both economically and increasingly militarily, and then also the influence of Russia around the world as well, there seems to be this bipolar or tripolar resistance to the Western way of thinking about things. And so even if we do provide the leadership that we purport to provide, it's not something that's completely embraced by people. So, from a business perspective, a lot of people might, you might hear people thinking, well, what you're saying is I get it, Jonathan, I get the logic of it, but really, we're in business here to make money, and I'm in business here to take care of my family. And ultimately what's going on in the world will dampen any efforts I make myself to make this contribution to a greener planet, as you're talking about.
So this is pretty intense. And what you're asking is really big questions. The
Uh-huh.
questions, certainly there are people who we will never convince that what they do is important. And yet every time I talk to people, their eyes tend to get bigger and they think, wow, I can make a difference. I can be, inspirational to my teenage daughter or my neighbor by doing the right thing. And just like that crazy movie Pay It Forward, you got to start somewhere. And I'm
Sure.
just willing to buy into that approach that there's nothing we can do about it. I
Uh-huh.
also really want to push back. I travel a lot and we have international partners, and they are just so focused on every single thing we do. I mean, my Dutch friends can name the governor of California, and we
Sure.
can't even point to the Netherlands on a map.
All right.
So people look at us all the time. As I said, I just came from South Africa. Those folks were watching the January 6th insurrection. They're going, what the heck is happening to you? And I say, don't worry, we'll get it under control. But and there's great relief in that. Sure, you're right that the leadership in China doesn't care, but the people care. And maybe the leadership in Russia doesn't care, but the Ukrainian people care. On and on. And I can go on forever about this. I just came back from South Africa a couple of years ago. South America a couple of years ago. Everybody there knew what we were doing. And when I would ask the Peruvian, why do all your presidents end up in prison after they get out of office? They look at us and say, because we don't have a strong democracy. So they're all watching us, and I think most of them really do respect and to the point of almost idolize us. That's what I found anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, yeah, it's really cool. So you have this idea of people, planet, and profit. What kind of people are you looking for in your business to work with you? When you're looking for an employee, how do you go through the process of attracting the right people and putting them in the right positions in your company?
So we are a timber frame company with high performance enclosures. That's really what we do. We also do millwork from either reclaimed or sustainably harvested certified wood products. So we're basically wood people. And the reason I actually started to become a wood person after, we started many, many years ago, was that it was pretty obvious that the stuff is gorgeous and
Yeah.
and really easy to work, easy to attract great people who want to work with it. So it was pretty clear to me that I was onto something good. It was beautiful, it was sustainable, and I was able to attract super good people who have now, many of them have been with me for decades.
That's
And
great.
even the new people, which is critical to any organization, that new people jump in and bring new energy and new thoughts. Even they're there because they're inspired, and not inspired by me, but inspired by the community that we've created at New Energy Works and Pioneer Millworks. So part of the answer is, if you build it, they will come, to
Mm-hmm.
use that cliche.
Yep.
And I think that that's a big thing. The guy who is our COO right now, for instance, wrote a letter 17 years ago to me and said, so I'm working in aerospace and I'm creating rocket ships. Let me tell you, it's not as sexy as it sounds. I want to join you guys. Every morning when I wake up, I go to your postcard of the day and see what else you guys are up to. So when you can be so tactile and have that immediate impact, we're not that big a company. We're 160 people on two coasts, and and so we're still small enough that people have impact, and we're able to know who our workers are, and we're able to do some gorgeous work that attracts good people. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question exactly, but first you've got to have a place that people want to come.
Yeah. I think it's really
After that,
interesting, though. Just you use the word beauty there, which is a lovely word that we don't really consider often in our world, it seems, or we maybe even misdefine beauty. But it's interesting how you you see the beauty in what you do, and that beauty is attractive. Can you talk more about that?
I can. So tomorrow night, I'm giving a presentation at the Northwest Eco Builders Guild on a project. We were chosen from a number of other projects, and as one of the people who are presenting at their annual convention tomorrow night. I'm not sure if it's convention, but so the reason they chose us is that this particular project fits all the eco stuff. It's low carbon in the build. It's carbon sequestration in the materials. It's operating, low operating costs, but it's also gorgeous. This home we did is it's stunning. It's not big, 1,700 square feet. And that's another important issue, that, gorgeousness can be human scale, as I like to call it. But it's beautiful. And so for us, again, we can inspire the client, we can inspire our coworkers, our subs, because our bar is high when it comes to fine woodworking, as an example. So, people want to be inspired, and they have to be inspired by more than just graphs and numbers, even though for some that's very important.
Tell me about how your philosophy to business influences the clients that you choose to do business with and the clients that you don't. Is there ever a situation where a client comes to you and they want you to do a building and you'll say, you know what, I don't think you're a fit for me. I don't think that we're a good alignment culturally.
No. Sometimes I want to, honestly.
Okay.
But the truth is, because we're there, that project, whatever it is going to be better. Because we're there and we don't compromise certain values, like, for instance, the performance of the enclosure, as an example. Mm-hmm. Because we're there, that enclosure is going to be better. It's going to do all those things that I just said, which is sequester more carbon, use less carbon in the construction, use less energy during the operating lifespan. So because we're there, that project's going to be better. And it's going to support my staff and my coworkers. So for me, it's very rare for us to turn down a project. Now, there may be design considerations, not culture considerations. And for instance, we don't do concrete, steel, and glass modern homes.
Right.
It's just we are. But if it's who we are, if it fits our skill set and our aesthetics, although that's always so personal. But if it fits our skill set, then we'd like to do the project. And not always, is our heart into it at the begin, but usually by the end, we love the project. So, often we love the clients. My own company has a huge variation in political, philosophical, spiritual sensibilities. 160 people, you can imagine, from New York to Oregon. We are very, very diverse. So it's not as though I'm going to say, well, no, I'm sorry, you voted for that guy. So I'm not.
No, I was thinking more in terms of, you mentioned something about the size of the home is 1,700, and you talked about human sized. So let's say someone came to you and they said, listen, I want a 25,000 foot home, and I want all the sustainability and everything like that, but it's a certain size. With your philosophy and your outlook, which I understand, I think I understand where you're coming from. Does that philosophy and outlook, other than the materials, you said that, we don't do these types of materials, but when it comes to size and the impact of a building, because, the larger you get, the more of a footprint you have and the more impact you have, even if you use sustainable products. Does that ever come into the equation where you say, no, I'm not going to build that because that's too large, or something like that? Maybe I'm asking it awkwardly, but I'm just trying to get to some of the.
I think it's a really valid question, and really valid to ask someone like me who's kind of opinionated about these.
Yeah.
But again, I have a lot of coworkers who are like, heck yeah, we'd take that. And I myself am intrigued by the challenges of that. It is true that one of the things, if we're the architects, which we do our own architecture for maybe 20% over all of our projects, which is a really great ratio. 80% come from independent architects around the country. 20% come from inside. It's a really nice business balance, and for both inspiration, but also source of work. And I would say I find it fascinating to be able to build a 25,000 square foot house if we inspire them to maybe build 23,000 square feet.
Sure.
But done better.
Sure.
If they say I want 23,000 square feet of garbage, then, and they're unmovable, then that's probably not going to work for us. For instance, right now I'm turning down jobs that the person comes in and says, and by the way, I'm using spray in place closed cell polyurethane foam. I can tell you that the GWP, the global warming potential of that, is about 13,000 times greater than the wood fiber insulation that we use.
Yep.
And so for me, I say, well, let's talk about it. And we talk and we really work through it. And I was telling you before we started of the story that I built a house maybe 8 years ago for a oil man, Texas oil man, and we were telling him how we build and how our exterior thermal break, which is a rigid insulation around the outside of the stud wall, is going to be wood fiber insulation. I said, we used to use polyisocyanurate. Now we've got new products that we import from Germany called, in this particular case, it was Styco, which is a wood fiber rigid insulation. We use it for a lot of reasons, one of which is, we are trying to limit petroleum. And then I was just quiet, waiting for the hammer to come down, feeling like this guy was going to pick up his desk and drop it on my head. He thought about it for a while, looked at me and said, I think that's a great idea. And on we went.
Sure.
At that point, I knew that if I could convince that fellow to use wood fiber insulation over a petroleum-based product, I said, there's hope. And, it's just one little thing. So honestly, I'm intrigued by that 25. Do you have a 25,000 square foot home you'd like to refer me to? I mean, that would be fun.
That'd be cool, huh?
Yeah. So we just finished quite a large home, and we do large homes as well as small homes. I'm just happy to work for interesting people.
Yeah, that's cool. So where do you find the most tension in those 3 pillars of people, planet, profit? Where do you find the most tension?
People.
Yeah, interesting, huh?
Everybody in your audience, raise your hand if you're struggling with, staffing requirements.
Right? Yeah, right.
Right.
Yep.
Or if you've had a client here and there who maybe just didn't get along with your coworkers as much as you think, or or run into a building inspector who just wasn't on board. So people are complex and challenging, and now I'm particularly intrigued with my new role as CEO of a 100% employee-owned company, as opposed to previously being the sole proprietor, so to speak. I've gone from sheriff to federal marshal. I now have to follow a lot of rules and convince a lot of people and kind of follow the book, as opposed to riding into town on my horse and six shooter.
That's interesting. So let's talk about that a little bit. Why did you choose an ESOP vehicle as the means of? I mean, I'm assuming. Well, let me back up. What was your main motivation for wanting to transfer from sole proprietorship to something else? Hey, this is Eric. Hope you're enjoying my chat with Jonathan today. And it is the time in the show where we talk about the book that you need to get your hands on. And that is Construction Genius. Let me see. Is it focusing? Oh, yeah. On video now it's focusing. You can see the title: Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS. Leadership, Strategy, Sales, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. It's 5-star reviewed on Amazon. It's an awesome book. You should buy it. It will impact your leadership in a tremendously positive way. And it only costs $19.99 for a paperback. Woo! Killer deal. Go get the book. You'll enjoy it. Now back to my conversation with Jonathan.
It's not hard to figure out that there's just a few ways to leave and transition out of a company when you begin to age out. And I'm in my mid-60s. So, at some point, I'm not going to want to work as hard as I do. Long ago, my wife would suggest that she doesn't want me to work as hard as I do. So, you have to start thinking about transition.
Yeah, but if you were hanging around the house for a couple of weeks, you might be saying, "Hey, back to work."
We'll see.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Be careful what you wish for.
I'll get back to you on that, Eric. So you have to transition, and you can never start thinking about it too early. So there's 3 or 4 ways to do that. One is being carried out of the office in a box, leaving a mess behind you because you didn't plan.
Yep.
Another is finding third-party arm's length transactions, which is the common way to do it. Find somebody to buy the business. And the concern with that is that the math isn't on your side. Mm-hmm. So often people get hurt, businesses don't make it because somebody with money or thoughts come in, think they can run this business and actually can't. Or because of the actual added debt on the balance sheet, they've got to make cuts or do things that maybe your staff and that culture that you've created doesn't really appreciate. So, and in a company like ours, we're really quirky and spread out and doing a lot of different things. Wow, hard to do. So the third, the one that I chose, was basically sell it to the employees. Mm-hmm. And why not? I mean, these folks are the ones who made this thing happen, and they continue to make it happen. I mean, we've pretty much, we say we've always had an ownership mentality. Mm-hmm. I mean, I couldn't have moved to Oregon from New York and still run this thing for the last 15 years if the people in New York still, didn't act like owners. Right. That said, you can't take an ownership mentality to the bank. Mm-hmm. And so this is an actual real way to reward the people who are helping and who are doing the work with what is simplistically an additional retirement plan. It's now we go from a sense of ownership to real ownership. Mm-hmm. And while a sense of ownership is great, it really is important, real ownership has tangible benefits. Like it's a proven fact that ESOPs, which is employee stock ownership plan, mm-hmm. Companies have much greater retention, greater profits. And there are people, when they retire with more retirement than your normal company. Mm-hmm. And so these are powerful things to offer to your coworkers who have been with you, but also to invite new people to come in. They say, well, when you join us, you're an owner, after a vesting period, of course.
Yeah.
So the employee stock ownership plan is a federally controlled program, very, very tight oversight from the IRS and the Department of Labor, yep. Because since it's a tax protected entity and the tax protections are what are used to buy out previous ownership, it is also open to fraud.
Yes.
And as soon as you say tax protected, you get every shyster around, circling the house. So because of that, it's very, very regulated. There's a lot of rules and regulations, and there are costs on a yearly basis to the upkeep of the ESOP. So you have
what are you doing?
A certain profitability. But once you are that, yep. Then it is an amazing process. I have been bought out. I probably could have been better on the open market, frankly, but I did fine. And I feel great about, I didn't want to be that guy who shows up at the local grocery store to see the cashier saying, wow, you got out of this with real well, but the rest of us got nothing, when it comes to transitioning a company. Sure. Instead, my people come, the people who I've worked with for a long time say, thank you.
What sort of work do you do? Because in working with companies that are ESOPs, I think one of the biggest challenges that some companies have is communicating the not the logic of the ESOP so much, but the mechanism of the ESOP to the employees or to the owners, and how they can benefit, what they need to do, and the approach they need to take to benefit from it in the long term. So what kind of work do you guys do communicating that internally to your people?
We have one word. It is over-communicate. And so we started this process probably 7 years ago now. 3 years ago, we did our first tranche, which is just a fancy French word for step or slice.
Yeah.
And we became 30% employee owned, 30% ESOP. Mm-hmm. And then this last year, we went from 30% to 100%. Mm-hmm. And all this time, we have been talking, we have been meeting, we have a monthly ESOP newsletter that's handled by one of my longtime coworkers, Megan. And she runs a ESOP communications committee where she's got, I think, 10. She's pulled in 10 people from various parts of the company to, plan events, plan communication, hear suggestions from the floor, all that stuff. But every year for the last 30 years, and this is kind of might be interesting to you, Eric, we have done what we call a day of business.
Mm.
We shut the whole place down, and we put all the phones on automatic answer. And for the whole day, we spend sharing how we did financially with very open books. How are we doing versus our budget? What's the rolling 10-year history? Where are we going in the future? And then we spend a bunch of time on what projects are we doing? Because not everybody can see, the fine woodworking group doesn't always see what the timber framers are doing, who don't always see what the enclosure folks are doing, who don't always see what Pioneer Millworks, who's our millwork company, is doing. And so everybody gets to see that in these, 300 gorgeous slides. And we sometimes will bring in a guest speaker or in the afternoon, or we'll break up and do smaller group sessions. And then also at night, then we'll just have fun and games and bring in food trucks and barbecues and throw axes and other things like that. And so we shut down for the whole day. It's paid, of course, and we share information. So we've been doing that for 30 years. So as we started to get closer to the ESOP, that was just part of the communication. Here's where we're going. Here's where we are. Here's where we're about to be. And so because of that continual culture of communication, it has really helped us to make this transition pretty well.
That's great.
One of the things I say about the ESOP too, I think it's important. I've said this now each of my day of business for the last 7 years is this is not some sort of trick to make you work harder. This is not management saying, oh, now you're an owner, you should be working harder. The truth is it's an acknowledgement of what you deserve for already working hard. And I think that has resonated well with people.
How did you get into business in the first place?
I was unemployable.
Mm-hmm.
I've got lots of sayings. One of them is hey, we've all heard the problem with labor is management. I've added 2 more axioms. Problem with management is ownership, but we owners have to be owners because otherwise we'd get fired.
Right.
So honestly, you're a coach, right? That's what you do for a living beyond talking to people like me.
Uh-huh.
You understand that if people had started to listen to you 20 years earlier and been coachable, they would be so much better off. They might be happier people, or they might be better business people. I wasn't smart enough to hire you 20 years ago. So I just kept working. And that's really, I don't know if that answered your question very well, but sometimes entrepreneurs just have to follow their nose.
Yeah, no, I understand that idea about being unemployable. I know how you feel. I feel the same way myself. The question I have for you is, so you're running a business with 160 people, and obviously this is something where you grow in your understanding, because one of the great challenges that someone who is entrepreneurial like yourself has is harnessing their energies in a rational way that allows the growth of a sustainable business. So how did you go about that process? Did you need to bring in someone else to help run the sort of the operations of the business while you focused more on the entrepreneurial activities? What was that process like?
I wish I could tell you that it was carefully thought out and scientifically approached. One of the things that happened, I think that's intriguing about us, is 15 years ago, I moved from our core business in Western New York in the gorgeous Finger Lakes region to Oregon into the gorgeous Willamette Valley region. And I left saying, I think we had at that point grown to 165 people, and I was no longer really being effective. I think, as you can well imagine, a lot of entrepreneurs are good at starting things and bad at managing them. Mm-hmm. And I felt a certain personal toxicity. I just wasn't enjoying my day-to-day. And so I said, you know what, I'm moving. Maybe I'll be a West Coast salesperson. Maybe I'll sell the company. Maybe I'll sit around on the beach. Nobody believed that last one.
Right.
But we all got together and talked, and they said, well, why don't you just start a smaller operation out west? And because, a lot of our wood comes from the west, we do have west of the Rockies clients who are hard to service. Just go do it out there, and we'll all, continue on. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. Why don't we do that? Of course, it was, I landed in Oregon in 2008 in August. And you're certainly of the age to remember what August of 2008 looked like. In some ways, it couldn't have been a worse time to start a business. I had to find a school for my child, a grocery store, design and build my own house, start a business in Oregon while helping to maintain a business in New York during the largest recession of my life. Certainly not looking forward to doing that again.
Yep. It's interesting, though. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. However, in some ways, it's also a very good time to start a building. I used to give lectures on business, and I gave them during the recession. And I like not Jay Leno, but David Letterman. He used to say, the 5 best ways to do something, and then he'd start at number 5 and number 4 and number 3. Well, there are. I would start off by saying the 5 best ways to be in business during a recession are, in Monday morning, the freeway is actually quite open and not very busy. The big guy at the will call desk actually is happy to see you.
You're right.
You can forget to schedule the crane for the timber frame raising, and yet one is still available the next day. And stuff like that. So in some ways, it's a great time to run a business. Particularly if you're as incompetent as I am. So that's anyway. What happened is I moved out there, and I left good people behind me.
Yeah,
and those good people just simply rose to the top. And not everyone is still there. I mean, there's always going to be attrition, but there are good people who are still there, still doing their job, still part of our management team. And often and rarely asking me for my opinion necessarily on their day-to-day stuff. I'm there as helping at the top on the board, sort of the visionary, if that's, a sort of an annoying way to call myself. But there is some of that truth. So whereas on the day-to-day stuff, I'm not telling people what to do because they're smart enough to do it. And if you don't have people who are smart enough to do it, look in the mirror and figure out why.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's interesting because, we have a mindset in business, or at least we're told that we have to have some sort of grand strategy and plan that we're executing all the time. But a lot of times, the decisions that we make in business are, serendipitous in many ways, or they're driven by opportunity that comes up and opportunity that's seized. And sometimes we don't have complete control over those opportunities, and other times we're more active in seizing them. But it's just interesting to think how business develops in ways that we don't expect sometimes.
I've often said there's nothing scares me more than a 5-year strategic plan.
Yeah, I call it dusty binder planning, right? You pay some consultant to come in and you give him, a bunch of money, and you get a binder at the end, and then you put it on your shelf. Yeah, whenever I work with my clients on planning, I'm like, you can talk about where you're going to be 5 years from now. That's terrific, but let's plan for, a year, maybe 3 years tops, and then we know that no plan survives contact with the enemy. You know what I'm saying?
That's so well said. We do really, really thorough, in-depth yearly budgeting, 12-month budgeting.
Yep.
And that process year after year actually kind of creates its own vernacular, its own rhythm. So, and then we track that budgeting really closely on a month-to-month basis on all 5 of our profit centers. And so we really have a rhythm of what that is. Now, we actually are doing some planning now on the 3 to 5 year, only because we have some really large buildings and CapExes that are coming.
Yep.
And so we have to look at that. But as a typical rule, that's not our MO.
Yeah. And so I'm not encouraging looseness or lack of discipline, but it's just that, if you're doing 10-year planning, I would say, set yourself a big 10-year goal, go for it, and then get busy today doing what you need to do to run the business in a profitable way.
Well said.
So let me ask you this then. What is the biggest contrast you've seen between Oregon and New York, Western New York?
Oh, that's interesting. Both are geographically similar,
Yeah.
rolling farmlands and water elements, the Finger Lakes region in Western New York, the Columbia and Willamette rivers here, as well as the coast. A lot of good, caring people. Politically, very different. Western New York's conservative, and the Willamette Valley is very liberal.
Hmm.
So those are big differences. That sense of environmentalism is much stronger out here
Hmm.
than it is in Western New York. Though we are always trying to make a difference there, and certainly we, as I said earlier, we're certainly seeing it much more now than we did 5 years ago, for instance, or 10
Hmm.
years ago in Western New York. But out in the Willamette Valley here in Portland area, it's like everybody's second word.
Yeah.
So those are some big differences. Portland, I consider Western New York more homey,
Uh-huh.
uh, and Portland more transient.
Hmm.
Uh, and it has attracted amazing people and amazing talent out here to Portland. Whereas in New York, in Western New York, it's more homegrown,
Hmm.
and I really respect that. A couple of my coworkers have these amazing extended families, and they all are within 10 miles or so. Whereas out here, you know, uh, 3 out of 4 people weren't born here, for
Yep.
instance.
Yeah,
So,
that's interesting, isn't it?
yeah, the skiing is better here.
Yep.
So here, when I say here, I'm in Portland, Oregon. So,
Yeah. So you've been in business, obviously you've been around for a while. If you had to go back and start your business all over again, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently, if anything? And if you wouldn't do anything differently, if that's sort of a question that's kind of not hitting the home, then don't feel that you have to come up with an idea. But if you have something, feel free to share that with us.
so I'm always impressed with these folks. Usually they're, big, strong men who say, yeah, I would live my life and not do anything differently. Um, I'm not sure I would do anything the same, Eric.
Right.
I've made every mistake there can be, but the difference with me is I have to make them 10 times before I figure out how to get it right. This whole thing about hindsight is 2020, that's a goal for me.
Yeah.
Uh, so I would do a lot of things differently. I would try to not let the business control my mentality 24/7. It's very hard to do as an
Good luck with
entrepreneur.
that, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night and I think about business, and I've got this gorgeous wife laying next to me and I'm thinking about business.
Yep.
There's a sickness there. I think that if I could change that, I would try to do that. I would also get more coaching earlier. Honestly, this isn't
Yeah.
a plug for you and your business. I didn't think I know you guys existed back 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I would try to listen better. I mean, I have some very good mentors in my life, but mostly they were sort of trade mentors, not business mentors. I never really had a good business mentor, and I would probably try to do that better. Um, I would probably not be as ambitious. We started with a $6,000 loan, and now we're a 30 or $40 million business, and that didn't happen without push.
Yeah.
And that's not easy. That takes a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice. So,
It's interesting you say that though, because you think about the so you put in that work and that sacrifice, and you went from a $6,000 loan to a 30-40 million dollar company. You've got 160 employees. So you think about the impact that your
coworkers.
coworkers. Yeah, thank you. You think about the fellow owners. You think about the impact that you've had upon not only their lives, but the lives of the community, the lives of their families. And without that push that you've put in, perhaps that impact wouldn't have been so extensive.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt about it. I mean, if you look at people who sacrifice for the community around them, this as a incredible example, Sister Teresa types,
Sure.
or certain politicians who really actually care and are there for the service,
Mm-hmm.
or that sort of a thing. It's impressive, and to a lesser extent, folks like me are that way because we really have pushed the industry towards a more sustainable, higher craft. My coworkers are better off than maybe they would be somewhere else, and So, I buy that, and I appreciate your saying that. And that's what keeps me going. In the dark of the night, though, it's not always helpful.
No, it's not, because you have to deal with yourself, in the dark of the night, and the immediate problems that you have in front of your face in terms of your business. But I think it's always good to take that time to reflect on, the impact that we have that perhaps we don't even appreciate.
I had to laugh the other day. I won an award that is coming up in December now for the Rochester business community, called an Icon, the Icon Award. And there's like a half a dozen or a dozen people who win this award every year, I guess.
Yeah.
And I laugh. I say, well, that just means I've been around long enough that
right.
I'm still alive, and and they're finally seeing some of this stuff. But so if you beat your head against the wall long enough, you start to make a dent in that wall.
That's awesome. Okay, so I just want to wrap up here. I really appreciate your time. Give us one restaurant recommendation there out in Portland.
Andina.
How do you spell that?
Andina. It's Peruvian, but it's Peruvian at the highest level. And the mom who started it came from Peru. She's now handed it down to her kids. It's extraordinary.
That's great. I think this might be the second time that we've had Andina recommended on the podcast. It sounds familiar.
I could give you others.
No. This is out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. I'm gonna put the link in the show notes so that people can check that out if they're in Portland, and I'll make sure that people get a chance to go there if they wish. Jonathan, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us here today on Construction Genius.
Eric, thanks so much. You are a pretty smart guy. Now I know where the title came from.
Yeah, right. It's funny. People ask me that all the time. They say, "So are you the genius?" Right? And I tell them, no. The company name comes from the quote from Edison, right? Genius is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. So I'm just the 1%. All of my clients, they're the 99%.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jonathan today. Do me a favor, go out to wherever you get your podcasts and give the show a rating or a review, or a rating and a review. The more ratings and reviews we get, the more the show can be seen across the wonderful internet, and the more people can listen to the show and benefit from the wisdom that my guests share. Thank you again for listening to Construction Genius. I will catch you on the next episode.